I left Idaho Falls at 6:15 in the morning because I wanted to be on the trail with the first clean light. The drive to Swan Valley was empty and quiet the whole way down, US 26, the river off to my right, pale and flat under a thin band of fog that hadn't burned off yet. I'd picked Palisades Creek because it's straightforward. Follow the water up to the lower lake, keep going if you feel good, turn around before dark. I've hiked it a few times and always told myself I'd finally push past the lower lake and see the upper. I had a day pack with the basics: headlamp, filter, space blanket, cheap compass, paper map that showed the general basin, plenty of calories, first aid pouch, bear spray clipped to the shoulder strap. I signed the trail register at the kiosk, wrote my plate number on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the windshield wiper like I always do when I'm solo. The air smelled like wet wood and cold granite. It was late September. Aspen along the creek were already turning, coins of yellow against the darker green on the slopes. The first couple miles are easy. The path is wide, loping alongside Palisades Creek, the water pushing fast over bedrock and fallen limbs, loud enough you have to raise your voice if you're close to someone. I passed a dad with 2 kids in hoodies, and a woman in waders working a run below an old log jam. There's a spot where the canyon narrows, and the trail is shaved into the wall with a decent drop on your left, and the creek chewing away below. Everyone gives each other space there without talking about it. Past that it opens and you can walk without thinking. I kept a comfortable pace, breathing easy. My plan was simple. Lower lake by late morning, snack, check the time, see what the sky looked like, and decide if I would go farther. I always tell myself I don't have anything to prove, but I also don't like turning around when I still feel strong. By 10:30 I hit the outlet of Lower Palisades Lake. The water was low enough to show a collar of gray rock all the way around. A little wind rippled from west to east. 2 tents were tucked in the trees near a flat meadow, and I could smell someone's coffee. A guy in a faded ball cap and a woman in a puffy jacket were packing up. We traded a hello. He said they'd heard something circling the camp the previous night. Probably a deer, maybe a black bear. Didn't see anything, just footsteps in the brush. He grinned when he said it, but he kept glancing at the timber like the joke didn't sit right with him. I laughed it off, wished them a good hike out, and walked along the north shore on a narrower path that stayed above the waterline. Past the far end, you pick up the main tread again as it funnels into the upper canyon. There were bits of orange flagging tied to willows along the way. Not Forest Service standard, just loose knots on thin branches. Outfitters do that. Sometimes volunteers do it when the brush gets bad. The tape looked fresh, edges still crisp, not frayed by wind. I noticed it in that way you notice something that may matter later but doesn't mean anything yet. The trail steepened after a tributary in a stretch of slick, angled rock where the creek crowds the trail and forced me to step carefully on wet black stone. When that ended, the canyon relaxed again and the trees got taller, the shade heavier. I didn't see anyone else after the couple at the lake. No birdsong for a long stretch either, which isn't strange in the middle of the day, but felt noticeable because the creek noise softened there and left a quiet that made every shuffle of my shoes sound too loud. Just before noon, I reached a fork that isn't on the printed map I brought. The main trail went straight, climbing into timber. The other was narrower, dropping left toward a shallow side drainage before curling up again. Someone had tied newer-looking blue flagging on that smaller trail, a single ribbon that snapped in the breeze. In the hard dirt at the junction, I could see the round prints of horses. They came from the way I'd come and turned up the smaller trail, fresh enough that the edges of the prints hadn't rounded off yet. I crouched and touched one out of habit, feeling the soft crumble. Pack strings go to the upper basin late season. I figured there might be a faster line that cut some switchbacks. I took the left without thinking very hard because it looked traveled and my legs felt good. The cutoff walked clean and then after 5 or 6 minutes thinned to softer tread through tall grass. More blue tape, but now it was tied low, at knee height, as if someone had been walking and fastening it without pausing. A single strand here, another there, little flashes of color and green shadow. It was the kind you can buy at a hardware store. No writing on it, no bent staples, no printed FS marker. The upper canyon opened into a shallow bench with meadow grass and old stumps where trees had fallen years before. The tape led me across at a slight diagonal, and then into a patch of younger firs where the ground turned to needles. That's where I stopped, not because I was tired, but because I felt all at once aware of every inch of skin on my back, the way you do when someone steps into a room behind you and doesn't talk. I turned slowly. Nothing. Grass bending in the breeze to my right, the edge of the meadow behind me, shadows in the trees ahead. The quiet pressed hard enough that I found myself holding my breath to listen. The creek was distant now, a muffled hiss like a road heard through a window. I told myself I was being jumpy. I looked down to make sure the last ribbon was still in view. It was tied to a sapling, 2 twists and a knot. I moved forward. The trees closed a little. Another ribbon on the left, then one low on the right, almost hidden. My calves prickled again, and I told my legs to keep going because stopping was worse. What I heard first were running steps in the brush, somewhere behind and uphill. Not heavy, not deer. 2 or 3 quick footfalls, then nothing. I stood still again, longer this time, turning until I had a full circle of stillness around me, doing the slow scan hunters do, looking for a curve that shouldn't be there, or a straight line in all the chaos. Nothing. When I started walking again, I did it as quietly as I could, rolling my feet instead of slapping the ground, trying not to let a branch flick back and make noise. It's hard to move that way with a pack, even a small one. It throws your balance a little. 30 feet later, I heard the footsteps again. Same cadence, same distance, as if whatever was moving had matched my pace and only broke silence when I did. There's a point where you drop the polite explanations. You go from probably a deer to something is following me. I didn't call out. I didn't want to tell it anything about me, even the sound of my voice. I pushed on, cutting between 2 firs and stepping over an old log gone to red sponge inside. When my foot pressed into it, the wood gave way and the smell of rot and cold sap came up, sweet and sharp. I watched my feet again. The ground ahead was churned and soft. Hoof prints, yes, but wrong somehow. Broad and round like they should be, but the spacing was off, too tight for a horse. The prints doubled back on themselves in tight loops, maybe stock-tied here pacing. I kept moving and the blue tape led me past the worn place and deeper into the trees. The next ribbon was different. The tail of it had an extra twist, like someone had tied it and then changed their mind about where to put the knot and fumbled a second time. It hung too low, rushing my thigh as I passed, and I flinched harder than that small touch deserved. The feeling of eyes on the back of my neck had turned to a weight. I couldn't shake the sense that if I looked at the exact right spot, at the exact right second, I would catch something standing too still. I stopped again and listened for my breathing to quiet. The steps came again, 3 quick touches through brush, and then silence. Closer. I didn't think. I spun and blew bear spray in a hard orange fan into the trees. The propellant boomed in the still air and the mist hung and drifted in droplets that caught tiny flashes of light. What answered was a sound I have not heard before or since and have no good word for. It was like hearing an animal cough and a person clear their throat at the same time. Except the person part was wrong, like someone trying to make the shape of a human sound without knowing how. The brush shuddered. I saw nothing move except the fog of spray thinning between trunks. Sap dripped from a wounded spot on a nearby tree where something had raked bark off in parallel grooves, long and neat. I backed away from it and almost stepped off a small ledge because the ground dropped where an old root had lifted and left a shallow trench. I caught myself and cursed out loud. A short, ugly word that made the silence heavier, the way dropping a rock into a still pond shows you how still it was. I wandered out of the trees into open where I could see. The blue tape pointed left toward more timber. where a line of light showed through the right-hand side. I pushed through and came into a wet, flat place fed by a trickle from a spring. The mud took my shoe a half-inch deep and held it. A dozen hoof prints pooled with water here. More loops and figure eights and stops and starts, as if an animal had circled the same patch for a long time with no destination in mind. In the center of those prints was a single bare footprint that did not belong there, and I still see it when I close my eyes. It wasn't a full print. It was the impression of a pad and the suggestion of toes, but the length was wrong for any bare human foot and the angle was wrong too. Sat as if whatever put it there had leaned heavily on the outside edge. I knew then I had taken a line I shouldn't have. I looked back into the trees and there, for 1 second only, I saw something pale where pale didn't belong. Not white like bone or the inside of bark, not animal, not clothing, a face, or the idea of one, at torso height behind a screen of young branches, half turned and low as if it had been crouching and lifting at the same time. The mouth, if that's what it was, didn't move. The branches whispered as the light shifted. When I blinked, it was gone. I didn't spray again. I stepped backward out of the wet spot, careful not to slide. Every hair on my arms was standing. My body had decided for me. I was going back the way I came. I turned, found the last ribbon, and headed toward it at a pace that was too fast to be quiet and too slow to call a run. The ribbons that had led me in didn't lead me out. I don't know if I missed one or if there wasn't one to miss. I hit a pocket of trees where I expected to see a tail of blue and found nothing. I turned twice, 3 times, and nothing looked exactly like it had, though that's what heavy timber does when you're rattled. Every tree is a copy of the last. I took a line that felt right, following the slight downhill that should aim me toward the creek. The steps in the brush to my right kept pace, showing up every 30 or 40 feet like a presence in a mirror you won't look at. The spell broke when a voice called my name from somewhere ahead. Caleb. It was my name, and it came through the trees with the soft edges you get under canopy. Not loud, but clear enough that it reached me clean. I've been on this earth long enough to know how my own name sounds when someone says it. I heard it, and every part of me braced, because whoever said it shouldn't have known it. I hadn't seen anyone since the couple at the lake, and I hadn't told them who I was. I hadn't called anything out. I'd written C. Martin in the register and left a plate number, but those were back at the trailhead. There is a reasonable line of thought where you say a hunter could have seen me and read the name stitched above the chest pocket of a shirt and used it, but my shirt didn't have a name, and whoever said it like they didn't understand the shape of the word, like their tongue was too big, like someone pronouncing letters they'd only seen on a page. I took a step backward. The voice came again. Closer, the exact same tone and rhythm, the exact same length between syllables, like a recording. Every instinct I have told me to get into open ground. I turned toward the downhill again and pushed hard until I found the edge of the bench and the slope broke and I could see a gray slide of talus with the dark stripe of the creek and trees below. It wasn't near. A long way down through brush and broken ground and rock and the kind of blowdown that eats an hour 100 yards at a time. I didn't have a choice. I didn't want to stay in that timber with a voice that could say my name the same wrong way twice. I started down and learned fast that the slope hid little shelves and drops. I tried to pick the cleanest line. The thing in the brush came too. Slower when I was slow, faster when I was fast. I slipped once and caught myself on a young aspen that bent and slapped back and hit me in the face as it righted, popping me across the lip hard enough to taste iron. I spit and kept moving. The trees thinned a little and I could see the creek better now, slick and slate gray and fast through boulders that looked like wetbacks. The light had gone gray without a cloud in the sky. That happens in canyons when your angle to the sun changes and the walls steal the light. I checked my watch for no good reason. 1:58. I wanted to know where the sun would be. At 6, at 7. I didn't like those numbers. Halfway down the slope broke clean into a jumble of charred logs laid like jackstraws. There must have been a lightning strike here years ago. thick black bowls fallen every which way. The bark bubbled and cracked and frozen mid-blister. I had to go over, around, under, picking a route where an awkward misstep could break an ankle and keep me there overnight. That's when I heard the voice again. Only it wasn't my name. It was my voice, and it said, "Hold up," from 10 feet to my right, where a black stump went to cinders. I don't talk to myself when I'm alone. I don't announce what I'm doing. I don't narrate my day. I heard my voice say those 2 words, and I didn't look. I pushed between 2 logs that pinched the pack hard enough to wedge me, and I ripped free like an animal in a snare, hearing fabric tear. And I took the slope in the clumsy, fast way you do when speed is the only thing you have going for you. Behind me, something climbed over the same logs I had just gone through. The cadence of steps rose into a short run, and then stopped again when I did, like it didn't want to be heard except when it chose to be. I hit the creek lower down than I'd aimed for. It wasn't a lazy braid here. It was a boulder garden with slick cobbles between, and the water, even in September, was cold enough to knife my shins numb the second I stepped in. I picked a line across because the opposite bank looked flatter and more open. It's stupid to trust open ground in a canyon like that, but the trees on my side pressed hard against the slope and I wanted space. Halfway across, with water swirling at my knees, my pole jammed between 2 stones and my wrist strap held me to it, and I had to wrench hard to pull free, and I almost sat down in the current. When I reached the far side, not thinking, I stepped out onto a slick rock and went to one knee, and my hand landed in something that wasn't mud. I looked down and saw my palm had pressed into a smear that looked like rust. A handprint laid there before me, the stain thin and even and somehow not dried. I pulled my hand away fast and wiped it on the grass. The smell that came up wasn't rot or iron. It smelled like wet dog and hot hair. Ahead in the open, the blue tape hung on a willow. There was no reason for it to be there. I had broken off the cutoff, gotten lost, dropped to the creek, crossed where there was no trail. And here was another ribbon with the same fresh square edges and the same knot. It moved in the minor breeze that always runs along water and pointed upstream like a finger. I stood still and watched it and counted my breaths out of some need to make the moment into a fixed object. 1, 2, 3, 4. Somewhere behind me and across the creek a twig popped once, and then the same pop sounded behind my left shoulder without the footsteps to carry it there. I didn't follow the tape. I found the most obvious line of human foot tread and stayed with that instead, even when it peeled away from the creek and cut back toward thicker trees. The light degraded in the canyon faster than it should have for the hour, and when I checked time again it was 3:39 and the sky above the walls had gone the color of a bruise. There's a subtle point in a day hike where I'm making good time becomes, I have to keep this up to be okay. I made myself eat then, even though my throat had gone dry. Because calories change how you think. Chewed slowly, drank, swallowed, drank again. A guy alone in timber crossing through hours where he doesn't want to be anymore is a different kind of animal than the guy who walked in. That's just a fact. The human trail I found was human in the sense that people had passed there, but it wasn't good. Deadfall had piled where winters had laid trees across the path and no one had cut them out. Game slide marks showed where things smaller than me had gone under. A stretch of old switchback had slumped where the hill had let go like a bad tooth. At a flattening I came across a pile of stones built up about knee-high, 5 of them stacked carefully in a column, a paddle of bleached bone laid on top. The bone was too flat and broad for a deer. It was from a cow, or an elk. It had a notch worked into the narrow end, not a break, but a tidy little cut, and black hair hung from the notch like someone had threaded it through and tied it off. I didn't touch it. I stepped around, giving it more space than it needed. The steps and the brush returned, not close, but always where the sound took advantage of the wind, sometimes upwind so I caught scent with it. Wet hair, dirt. The sour tang of something that had slept in the same patches of grass until the grass took the smell. Once on a short rise I heard a branch creak in a tree and the sound of weight shifting and a soft rasp on bark. as if something was hanging where it didn't belong and making small adjustments it couldn't help but make. I let the bear spray hang in my hand and walked with it in front of me like a bad talisman. Sunset came early because the canyon took it. The trees flattened the light until my eyes wanted to make shapes out of every shadow. I stopped and pulled out my headlamp, checked battery, clicked it off. I didn't want to shine it yet. A light draws attention and I already had enough of that. At the next bend, the trail started a steady climb. I recognized none of it. The map folded in my pocket was a useless sketch for the level of detail I wanted. My phone had no service. The little compass on my sternum strap told me west was behind my right shoulder, which fit the shape of the canyon, but the way the trail switchbacked and the way the creek meandered made direction into a joke. The only numbers that mattered were the ones on my watch. 4:58, 5:27, 5:49. When the dark fully set, it was like putting a lid on a pot. Heat left the air and I felt the switch on my skin. I clicked my headlamp on low and the beam made a tight tunnel ahead. The world outside that tunnel was murk, and suggestion and things just beyond its edge looked like they were moving even when they weren't. Bugs came to the light. My breath became a white line that curved away on the exhale and folded away out of the beam. I stayed on the footing I could feel through my shoes as much as see. The footsteps in the brush stopped. In their place came the soft, tearing sound of something moving through grass behind and above. And then exactly in front of me, half revealed in my light, a man stepped onto the path from the right and raised his hand in a lazy wave. That is what my eyes told me before the rest caught up. The shape had the size and the outline of a man. It wore a brown jacket that could have been canvas or hide and hung wrong on the frame beneath. The wave was slow and late, like a signal arriving through a long wire. The face was facing me, but it wasn't looking at me. The alignment was off, as if it hadn't solved where eyes should land. The headlamp painted its front flat. I did not think. I put my thumb down on the bear spray before my brain could say the word spray, and the orange cone blew across its chest and face and beyond, filling the space between us with a fog I could smell as it drifted back toward me. The thing made no human sound at first. It simply went down in a folding way, like joints had been put together for a different purpose and then asked to do this. It hit the ground on a hand and the back of one elbow, pushed, and slid back and away across needles so quickly and so fluidly that the distance between us doubled in a breath without the normal steps that belong in a movement like that. The jacket had no zipper and no buttons. It was a single piece. As it moved, it turned into brush and then into darkness, and the only sound it made then was the new noise of something breathing with the wrong rhythm. I never truly ran before that night. I jogged and sprinted and done all the normal human speeds because of sports or the fun of it. Running in the dark on a narrow path with a pack on while you don't know where your next foot is going is not like those things. It's a controlled fall, a series of fractions of an inch where luck holds you up. I did it because standing there and thinking about what I'd seen was not an option. The trail pitched up, then down, then into a shallow saddle that held cold air like a bowl and a smell of water nearby. Somewhere in that black timber I heard it call out again with my voice. A single hey, followed by another that sounded like a man trying to speak while his mouth was full of cotton. The second one went wrong at the end and made a click I felt more than heard. I blew through a stand of aspen where the trunk stood white and clean, and the bark took the headlamp in a way that made them look like cut poles. On the far side, the soil turned sandy and then soft, and I sank ankle-deep into a cold marsh. Winter dark grass hid the water. I stepped and pulled and stepped and pulled and made myself not look back because I didn't want to see it standing there at the edge watching me shoulder through the slow part. When I hit firmer ground again, I stumbled into an opening where a ruined cabin lay collapsed in a low heap. 3 walls sunk to knee-height. One still upright and holding the shape of a window. Everything was gray. The window opening showed a strip of stars and a wedge of hill. Inside the remaining wall, someone had built a circle of stones and burned a fire recently enough that when I put my hand above where coals would have been, the air captured there by rock was warmer than the rest. Beside the circle, someone had arranged 3 pieces of wood leaning against each other into a tidy little tripod, and a string of black hair was wrapped around one leg of it. The knot was clean, like the one in the bone groove. Beyond the far wall of the ruin, I heard the sound of something stepping around a rock, and then stepping around it again. I put my back to the upright wall and brought the spray up, and I held it there until my arm shook from the effort of not letting it fall. I don't know how long I stood like that. The watch said 6:22 when I checked, then 7:11 the next time. Between those numbers, the air thinned and thickened in my ears with my pulse, and at one point a coyote called on the ridge above, and 3 seconds later the same call came from 50 feet to my left, without the kind of echo a canyon makes. I kept telling myself to move, but feet root when they want to. I finally made myself leave when a small stone trotted across the packed dirt just inside the wall and came to rest against my boot. I hadn't heard it fall. I hadn't seen it come in. It had been thrown or rolled with purpose. I took one step, then another, and when I reached the edge of the ruin, I saw movement inside the square of the window. 2 hands gripped the sill from the outside, fingers splayed, nails dark, wrists thin. They held there a long second and then released and slid down the outside wall with a dry whisper. I went north because north was downhill there, and downhill meant water, and water meant the creek, and the creek meant the main trail somewhere. The path I was on, if it was a path, thinned to game runs and disappeared into small flats where the ground did what ground does in mountains. It looked promising, and then tricked you into thinking lines that weren't there continued. The headlamp was too bright and too narrow all at once, picking out details and lying about context. I kept it on low and covered it with my hand when I could, letting light leak through my fingers so I could see where to put my feet but not advertise. The trees pressed in. The sound of the creek grew louder and then disappeared when a stand of fir blocked the line of noise and then came back again, closer. I stopped twice to listen and found listening worse than moving because the moment I held still, the sounds crept in. I came to the water by accident. The ground simply ended and the beam hit the slick slope of a boulder, and beyond that, black and moving, was the creek. I didn't want to cross again in the dark. I didn't want to stay on that side either. I looked downstream and saw a log spanning a narrow place, thin and worn and gray with stripped bark, and the look of something that had been there too long. I didn't trust it. I put my foot up anyway because standing there felt like waiting. The log dipped under my weight, and the creek threw foam sideways where it struck a rock. I shuffled one foot and then the other, the way you do when you know the worst thing you can do is rush. 3 steps in the log twitched as if something touched it from below. My stomach went cold and tight. I went to a knee, grabbed with my left hand for balance, and something on the downstream bank laughed once, short and perfect in my own laugh, and then the sound dragged like a tape slowing down. I got off that log any way I could and went downstream on my side, scraping knees and shins and cutting the side of my hand on stone when I slipped again. 10 yards later, I found a set of rocks I could hop between and did it badly, almost sitting down in the water again, cursing out loud like a man who thinks volume equals control. On the far bank, the ground rose in a slope of small trash rocks, and then settled into larger ones that held the slope in place. I climbed into the trees and the hill eased, and there, like a stupid miracle, was a piece of cut log with the end chopped square, laid across a muddy patch, the center worn from boots. Human, maintained by somebody. I followed the wear until it showed me a path that had been walked enough times to keep brush from closing it. The first sign I was truly back on a real trail was a sawn cut in a downed tree where someone had bucked a section out and rolled it downslope. I put my hand on that bright sawwood and felt how smooth it was and told myself I was going the right way. The second sign was a little blaze scar on a tree, the rectangle of old cut and new growth framing it. The third sign was a smell I didn't know I'd been missing until it hit me. The faint sour of animal that isn't wild, the mix of leather and salt and horse. So light I thought I'd imagined it until the trail cut onto a small shelf, and I saw hoof prints stamped deep in the dust. wet at the bottom like they'd been made recently enough that water from the animal still fell in after it pulled away. I rounded a bend and headlamps hit me in the face, 2 bright circles at chest height, and a voice said, "Whoa there, real and wrong in the way all voices were wrong by then, too human to trust." I stopped and lifted my free hand and dropped the bear spray hand to my thigh. 2 riders sat there on calm, big-hipped horses, mules behind them on short leads, pack swaying. The front horse stamped once and shook a fly off, steel shank and leather rigging jingling. "You're out late," the lead rider said. He was an older man with a brimmed hat pulled low and a face that didn't give much away. Beside him, the other rider, younger, kept his light on me like he was trying to decide if I'd scare his animals. "I got turned around," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to somebody else. "You on the Palisades Trail?" "Yes." "Headed out?" "Yes." He looked past me, over my shoulder, into the dark I had come from, and I turned despite myself. Nothing moved there. Nothing sounded. The younger rider cleared his throat, and the sound of it was ordinary and miraculous in a way that felt stupid to think. "We heard something dogging us up higher," he said. "Figured it was a cat at first. Didn't commit. Stayed in the dark timber. Been a quiet night for talking." He said the last part like he regretted saying it out loud. The older man clicked his tongue and moved his horse forward and off to the side so I could slide past. "You can walk behind me," he said. "You can talk if you want or you don't have to. We're headed down." We walked like that for a long time, the horses' feet placing carefully, the mules stepping where the horses stepped, the sound of their breath steady and calming in a way that almost put me to sleep as I walked. The men didn't ask questions and I didn't tell them anything. Once, above us on a slanted face of broken rock, something dislodged a stone and it skittered until it hit and bounced and skipped again, and every animal in the line paused and lifted their heads and stared. Ears forward, and we all waited while dust drifted down and the sound bellied into the dark and died. "Keep moving," the older man said to the string, and we did. Lower, near where the canyon widens and the creek splits around islands of gravel you can walk on in July. We passed a sign I recognized and then a turn I knew, and things I had seen in daylight came back in the beam and turned into landmarks I could trust. The air warmed. The smell of cold rock went away. At a bend far ahead, I saw the glow a parking area makes when someone pulls in with headlights and then turns them off, and the interior lights stay on as they dig for something. The men told me their names then, too fast and soft for me to hold, and I told them mine, and they tipped their chins like they'd known it already and it didn't mean much to them. I thanked them once and then felt like I should do it again, and the older man said, "You're out. That's what matters," without turning. At the trailhead, the vault toilet and the bear board and the fee post all stood in their right places, like actors at ease. A truck idled. A woman sat on the open tailgate eating something wrapped in foil, her headlamp on red and her hands moving carefully. She looked at me and then looked away in a way that meant she'd learned to give strangers space in the night and held to the rule. I walked to my car and put my palm against the hood for no good reason and felt that it was cold, metal, and not a living thing. My windshield wiper still held the scrap of paper with my plate written on it. I could see my name in the trail register under a piece of plexiglass, my scribble crooked where I'd leaned the pen wrong. Before I opened the door, the coyote called again. This time it came from down canyon, not up. The notes were right at first. 3 rising, 2 falling, the same clean sound the ridge dogs make at dusk, and then it broke and stumbled, and somebody who had never made the noise tried to fix it on the fly and got it wrong. It turned into the beginning of a laugh and stopped short like a person who'd been told to be quiet at the last second. I got in the car and shut the door, and the thunk of it closing took the air out of my chest and gave it back. I turned the key and the engine caught on the second try, and I pulled the seatbelt across my shoulder like an old habit. In the rear view, I saw 2 points of light moving down the trail, the riders' headlamps as they brought the string in, and for a second I imagined one more light following them, lower than it should be, steady as breathing. The fear that lifted the hair on my arms then was the same as the fear that started in the timber when the blue ribbon brushed my leg. It was not any bigger. It was the same animal math. I put the car in gear and rolled out slow over potholes, tires finding the shallow places, the creek still loud even here. At the highway, I didn't look left toward the reservoir. I looked right toward home, and I turned that way, and I drove until the canyon fell behind and the road straightened, and the lights of Swan Valley laid out simple and human under their own small sky. I won't go back up that trail. If you've had an encounter in the backcountry where something mimicked your voice, or you found prints that changed mid-stride, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. And if this story kept you company tonight, a like helps other people find these accounts. Stay safe out there. The Tora Weep Overlook. I know how this is going to sound, so I'll start with the part that makes me look reasonable. I hike a lot. I grew up in the desert. I've done long dirt approaches where you bring extra fuel because you can't count on anyone coming if you shred a tire. I respect the rules that keep people alive out there. Tell someone where you're going. Top off water at the last spigot. Sign the log, even if it feels silly. I'm the guy who checks headlamp batteries at home and then again in the parking lot. I don't like scary stories. I don't believe in curses. If I had to describe myself, I'd say boring, prepared, and slightly too proud of both. We picked Tora Weep because of the drop and the quiet. The overlook sits right on the north rim where the canyon is narrow and the cliffs are clean, 3,000 feet straight down to the river. The road in is long and mean enough that most people don't try it in a rental sedan. It's national park land, but it feels like the end of a road someone forgot to finish. Lava fields, gray dust that climbs your legs, scattered juniper, and a view that eats sound. There's a ranger on duty, a vault, toilet, designated sites, and otherwise nothing. That was the point. Sunset, stars, and the sense that the noise of everything electric was far behind us. It was 3 of us, me, my girlfriend Liv, and my friend Marco, 2 trucks with clearance, real tires, and shells on the beds. We left early and took our time because a blown sidewall is a dumb way to ruin a weekend. We stopped at the ranger station, stepped inside, and the man on duty did what you'd expect. He slid the clipboard over, had us sign the backcountry log, confirmed our plate numbers, and ran the talk he probably gives 3 times a week. No water here. Pack out your trash. Don't drive past the stones by the rim. Fire rules posted on the board. Keep to the designated sites. He said he'd be around until about 9, and then in and out after that on checks. He didn't try to scare us. He did the job with the calm that comes from watching people underestimate the desert and getting tired of having to help them. We rolled to the designated zone, parked at the site with a little windbreak of rocks, and shouldered the rest of our gear. The plan was basic. Set up camp, eat early, watch sunset at the overlook, then do long exposure photos, Milky Way if we got lucky with sky. I had a tripod in its bag, a remote release, extra memory cards. Liv had the camp stove and was in charge of food. Marco stashed a cheap handheld radio in his jacket because he likes to pretend we're a search and rescue team. It was a clear, late-season evening that goes cold the second the sun drops. We had layers, hats, and the kind of headlamps that throw a tight white cone you can trust. There's an all-clear signal we use when we split up. It's not a Boy Scout secret thing. Over the years, we fell into it. 2 quick clacks of a rock on rock, then 1 more. It carries without yelling and doesn't broadcast "I have food" the way whistling sometimes does. We don't fetishize it. It's just our thing. I'm telling you this because it matters later, and because I want you to believe me when I say we didn't invite this. We follow rules because the desert writes its own and they're not negotiable. The sun went down with that fast desert trick where it's gold and then navy with nothing in between. We stood shoulder to shoulder on the rimstones and watched the river turn to a dark thread. I counted the seconds between the last light on the far wall and the first wind that found us up top. Coyotes went off somewhere behind us, not the yipping chaos you hear near towns, just short calls spaced out. It was the sound of something alive, checking in with itself. By the time we got back to the site, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Liv set the stove on a flat rock and started water for pasta. Marco dug for his radio and more layers. I walked to the vault toilet by the parking stones because I had to go and because I prefer to do that in actual facilities if they exist. The toilet is a dark box you can smell before you see it. The door faces away from the rim as if it's embarrassed. I propped it open with my foot because headlamps make me claustrophobic in small, stale places. On my way back, I heard Liv's voice. "Hey, can you bring the tripod?" It came from past the parking stones, in the lava field, right where the basalt breaks into lumpy waves between the junipers. It was her tone exactly, the way she hits tripod like she's teasing me for hauling too much gear. I turned with the bag already sliding off my shoulder and said, "What?" Because it was automatic. Because it was Liv. Because of course I'd bring it. She was 5 feet to my left at the stove, holding the lid to keep it from rattling, steam on her cheeks. "Bring what?" she said. I don't remember what face I made, but Marco noticed. He looked up from his layers and scanned the dark where I'd turned my head, because the instinct to look where someone else is looking is old. My headlamp lit the basalt ridges and short runs. It lit the closest juniper trunk. It lit the dark between branches like a curtain pulled away in strips. I didn't see a person. I saw a shape step behind the same juniper, then do it again. It felt staged, like a signal meant for me, like watching someone practice entering a door for a play. Step out, step back, repeat. The same timing, the same side, like it wanted to be noticed and then not. I said I must have misheard and went stiff the way you do when your body wants to choose a plan before you've looked at the map. Liv watched me and set the lid down gently. Marco slid his radio into a pocket but didn't turn it on yet. None of us said the word. You know the one. We didn't give it a name. Pasta is a comfort food, even when you feel like you brought the wrong language to a conversation. We ate standing up. The coyotes called again. Farther away or closer, I couldn't tell. The canyon takes sound and hands it back however it wants. We cleaned as we cooked, packed as we ate. The plan for long exposure started to feel aggressive, like a dare against common sense. The stars were so loud and the ground so black that my good camera felt like a toy. While I was rinsing the pot with a splash from our jug, the first rock clack came from beyond the parking stones. Clack, clack. Too quick. Clack. One more. Our code. I turned so fast water ran down my sleeve. It came again. Clack, clack. Clack. I had to force myself not to answer. It's like hearing your name and not turning your head. The urge is physical. "Don't," Liv said without looking at me. She said it to the air more than to me, to the idea of answering. "Okay," I said and gave my hand something to do. I set the pot down, wiped the water with a bandana, and slid the bandana into the crate like I'd planned that movement an hour ago. We sat. We didn't build a big fire because that's not allowed at the Overlook. We had a small, legal, careful one and then stamped it out before we even finished eating because we decided we didn't like the way the light flattened the foreground and pushed everything else back. We put on more layers. We turned off the headlamps one by one to see how the sky would land us in the dark. The noises came into focus. There's the small crunch of something light stepping in place for balance. There's wind in the needles. There's the tiny shifting sounds of our own jackets when we breathe. And then there's a smooth, dragging noise along the rim wall, like a body sliding on grit. It was too regular to be random. It paused, then continued. Belly down, moving, then a lift and a stuttering push to upright where no trail exists and no sane person would stand. You can read a rim the way you read a roof. Some lines are walkable and some are absolute. This was absolute. The sound moved in a way that made me see it without seeing it. Coyotes went up again, full chorus this time, and the hair on the back of my neck did what hair does when it would prefer to be under a hat. The calls cut off mid-yep. In the quiet that followed, something answered them. It wasn't a howl. It was a single flat ha, like someone clearing a fogged-up window with breath. No wave in it. No animal trying to match another. just an idea of a voice pushed through a human mouth that hadn't practiced vowel sounds. It came from the same general direction as the rock clacks, then from our right, then I swear to you from behind the vault toilet and the time it would take to jog there. Only there were no footfalls in between. We did the reasonable thing. We got in the trucks. It wasn't a panic. It was that coordinated don't talk about it decision you make when something crosses your line and you don't want to debate where to redraw it. We closed the tailgates quietly. We climbed into the shells. Liv and I took mine. Marco took his. We cracked the shell windows a half-inch because stale air will make you misjudge a situation as well as anything. We didn't slam doors because there's a difference between alerting the world and letting the world know you know it's there. 5 minutes later, something knocked on my shell window. Knuckles, not a branch. Knuckles. 3 even taps from a hand that had practiced knocking on doors. Then the same 3 taps with a different hand. You can tell. The second set was sharper and landed crooked, like claws clicking into the plastic between the glass and the frame. The rhythm changed. Auditioning methods. Knuckles, claws, knuckles, claws, as if the person on the other side was trying on bodies the way you try on tones of voice. From the other side of the truck, where the cab meets the shell, Liv's voice asked in a normal conversational volume, "Is the ranger home?" She was beside me, both hands on my sleeve, fingers tense enough that I could feel the half-moons of her nails through 3 layers and a glove. Her lips didn't move. She shook her head once, and the motion translated into me like a shiver. The same question came again from another spot a few feet away, like someone pacing and making small talk at a front desk. "Is the ranger home?" The tone was so exactly hers that my body tried to relax because that's what you do when someone you love asks you for help in the way they always ask you. Marco's radio hissed in the other truck. He hadn't keyed it. It was off. That hiss belongs to cheap electronics waking up, not to the sky. A low bump traveled along his tailgate like a heavy hand testing for a latch. He clicked the light on in the cab and it threw a little rectangle past his rear window. The bump stopped, then started at our truck as if the idea had caught up late. We sat through 2 more rounds of our all-clear clack, clack, clack from the basalt and didn't answer. The thing, the person, the voice kept trying like it was paging through pages of a manual written for a different model human. Knocks changed, footsteps reorganized into new loops. The ha sound pushed out at the end of breaths as if whoever was making it forgot they were supposed to be quiet. At some point this stops being an experiment. At some point you choose clerical procedure over pride. We made a call without saying the words. We would go to the ranger residence. We would do the boring thing people do when an animal tears a cooler and you want it logged so someone else doesn't lose a hand. We didn't need to be heroes. We needed to not be the subject of a talk given to the next people who signed a log. I moved first because the longer I waited, the more the waiting grew teeth. I opened the shell window enough to get my hand out, caught it with my sleeve so it didn't slap the glass, and thumbed the latch inside. I slid light over the rear handle, nothing close enough to catch in the beam, and popped it. We climbed out fast and in sequence, the way you do when you've slept in truck beds enough to know the choreography. Liv had the keys. She got in the driver's seat. I moved around to the passenger side and never once looked at the spot where I felt eyes. Marco had the same thought at the same time. He threw his tailgate up and was in his driver's seat with the engine turning over before I had my buckle clicked. My truck wouldn't start. I know that sound. The click that isn't a click so much as a hollow denial. The way an engine coughs once when it wants to try and then refuses to even do that. The dash lit. The battery wasn't dead. The starter didn't even try. Liv swore and reached for the hood release. I was out and the hood was up before the word finished. I know enough to check what isn't technical first. Is a cable loose? Is a connector jostled? Is there a reason the line is draped where it shouldn't be? I reached in with my light and that's when I touched it. Someone had tied something around the ignition cable bundle like twine. It was wet and stiff at the same time, like old leather soaked and dried wrong. When I pulled my fingers back, they were tacky. It wasn't plant fiber. It wasn't rope. It had knots, the way a butcher knots cord before a roast, and black hair hung from the notch like someone had threaded it through and tied it off. I didn't need the light to smell it, wrought with iron under it, sinew. I tore it with a force I didn't plan, and it came apart with a fiber-tearing sound that made my stomach lurch. The strands stuck to my glove like glue and then let go as if they were deciding who to prefer. "Leave it," Liv said. "Leave it. Get in." I know trucks. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to be a person who solves a mechanical problem and drives out. There's a version of me who does that. That version didn't live there. I dropped the hood hard enough to make the light bounce and ran around to the passenger door. By then, Marco had pulled up nose to nose with us and leaned across to pop his locks. We piled into his truck without counting seats. Buckles snapped, keys turned, engine caught. As we rolled between the stones, something ran along the road shoulder parallel to us. You see deer run. You see people run. You know how weight looks when it lands. This didn't land. It skimmed, like the ground had a layer of oil poured onto it. It matched our speed even as Marco accelerated in a way he didn't like to. I turned to watch it and couldn't make out a hole, only pieces as they entered the headlamp cones and left again. Tall, too tall in one phase and then wrong short in the next, like a person wearing a frame under their clothes and forgetting which joint bent which way. It ran without tiring, and every time I thought I had the distance figured it adjusted, like it was listening to our tires and setting cadence to the stones they hit. The road out is a series of small, bad decisions attached to each other. Washboard, embedded slabs you could file a knife on, dips that look shallow until you put weight into them. Marco knows how to drive it. He hates to hit anything he can avoid. He drove like he was back in a city he didn't like, rolling yellow lights and cutting lanes he shouldn't. The shape kept pace outside the beam, and when it fell back I wished it would come forward so I could watch it again, because not seeing something is sometimes worse. Our horn sounded ridiculous in all that space, but we leaned on it when the beam of the Ranger residence came into view. Someone had put a porch light on a pole behind the main structure, and it glowed a clean, featureless white. We pulled up crooked and close. The door opened before we braked. The Ranger stepped out with a spotlight and a two-way clipped to his shoulder. He didn't ask questions. He swept the beam through the basalt like he was washing a floor. At the edge of the light, something paused halfway between the idea of a crouch and the shape of a dog. Then it decided, dropped to all fours in a way that inverted the mechanics of a spine, and moved with its weight wrong, joints folding toward the midline instead of away. The spotlight didn't catch a face. It caught texture, gray that wasn't fur and wasn't naked skin either. It threaded into the lava like it had been born there and learned basalt the way a toddler learns stairs. "Inside?" the Ranger said. He didn't shout. He said it quick and normal, and stepped back like he was leaving space for us to pass him in a hallway. We did. He locked the door in a practiced order I wouldn't be able to reproduce. Deadbolt, a slide, then a keyed latch I didn't see from where I stood. The office smelled like paper and coffee from a pot that had been allowed to cook down too far. He keyed his radio and gave dispatch words that sounded like a list he'd been told to stick to. Visitor report, possible person of interest near residences, no visual confirmation. He didn't say creature or animal or any word that would invite a story. He described it like a problem with a water line. He asked for a welfare check call-out and a note in the log. He asked for the other staffer on the south end to be notified. Then he posted himself by the door with the spotlight in his hands like a contractor holding a tool he knew better than the thing it pointed at. We sat on plastic chairs meant for permit talks and let our bodies shake inside our layers. When people tell you they didn't realize they were cold until they were inside, believe them. It felt like the air had been scraped off us. The Ranger didn't ask us to retell anything right then. He asked our names and rechecked our plate numbers against the log, like our existence could be verified by paperwork. It helped. A thing with a reference number can't eat you. The ha sound came once from outside, right against the office wall, like breath on glass, and then it didn't come again. The radio hissed and crackled enough to give me something to hate in a small, steady way. We sat through hours in a room that wasn't designed for that much time. The ranger took notes I never saw. He walked the light along the window frame with his wrist, the way you do to make sure you haven't drifted into a blind spot. The building creaked once, and I saw him flinch and then pretend he'd meant to shift his weight. It was a long dark, and then it was a gray that turned to a pale yellow, and the color in the office changed from scrubbed to human. He poured new coffee, and it smelled like something alive again. He told us we could follow him back to the sites to grab what we needed and then go straight out. "Please don't stop," he said. He didn't say what for. He didn't explain. He asked us not to. We said yes. Outside, the world looked dull and innocent. The rim was exactly as it had been yesterday, which was almost rude. He walked us to the spots where we'd heard the clacks and the breath. He stepped carefully and then pointed, and once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Footprints, human, barefoot, heel and ball, clear in dust that had settled on the basalt-like flour. They sat down along the rim where nobody puts weight. They moved in a line and then shifted mid-stride to something else, pads and toenails, the digits long and set at an odd splay. The tracks ran where there was no descent route, right beside the drop, and at a jog the shape of the foot split and recombined, like a hand trying on a glove a size too small. Farther on they returned to human, then repeated the change back as if a mind couldn't decide on an outfit. I saw a print where our parking stones had been last night, and a place where something had leaned a palm against the vault toilet door. The mark was wide. The fingers were too long. The ranger didn't speculate. He didn't shrug. He didn't tell us a story to make the moment neat. He said he'd log the prints and that he'd take photos. He asked us if we truly had everything we needed. We did. We did before he asked. He looked at the sinew smeared on my ignition cable with his face set at neutral, and said he wouldn't touch it until someone else had seen it. It had dried darker and pulled tight around the bundle like a tendon reattaching itself. We drove out in a convoy of two and didn't look in the mirrors more than we had to. The desert in daylight is beautiful in a way that asks a price. I paid it. I stared straight down the road and tried to focus on the way the washboard lined up with the shadow under my side mirror. I counted culverts for no reason. I stayed between the stones when there were stones. When there weren't, I found the old tracks and made mine sit inside them, like that meant something. We stopped in Fredonia because that's where the road gives you permission to exhale. We didn't talk about it then because talking would have made it solid. We pumped gas and washed our hands with that hard station soap that smells like orange in a mechanic's bay. I scrubbed until the web of my glove print was gone from my skin. Liv stood with her back to me as if she couldn't decide whether to keep me in sight or the door. Marco put his forehead against the top of the steering wheel before he realized people at the pumps could see him, and lifted it again as if he'd only leaned forward to check a gauge. I've tried out different words since. Coyote with mange, some guy on something, a person with a talent for throwing their voice, someone with a hook on their heel to make tracks. I come back to mimicry because that's the part that isn't human even when it is. In my head, when I replay it, the voice that asked if the ranger was home isn't a voice produced by vocal cords. It's a recording cut and arranged without understanding. People have a word for that in this region. I don't like to use it because I don't like to summon something by its name, but nothing else fits what it did with our sounds and the shape of our attention. Skinwalker. I know how this reads. I also know what a bundle of sinew tied like butcher's twine looks like when you tear it from a live electrical system in the dark, and the smell sits in your nose for 3 days like you packed it there. I know what a single flat ha feels like when your bones agree it wasn't meant for you and it was meant only to test a distance. I know the particular click of claws on a shell window when someone is deciding what hands to wear. The ranger didn't ask us to write a statement. He said he had what he needed. He said, "Please don't stop again on the way out." We didn't. We went home the long way, around a truth none of us wanted to name. I kept meaning to go back, to prove to myself that it was the dark and some sounds I'd stacked wrong. The idea of that road makes my hands sweat at red lights now. So that's what I have. 3 trucks worth of tire dust in the driveway, a photo card full of stars we never took, and the certainty that I have no business on the North Rim again. We drove that line to Fredonia without saying anything because there wasn't anything to say that would change it. We were done. If you've experienced something at Torweep or another remote overlook that tested your understanding of what's possible, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments. If this one kept you awake tonight, the like helps others find these accounts. Be careful out there. The Bisty Badlands. I want to say up front that I respect the place and the people who were there long before I ever set foot in it. I don't throw certain words around lightly. If I use one later, it's because I ran out of better explanations. I'm writing this down the way I remember it, the way it felt, with the dull details intact, because the ordinary parts are what make the rest impossible to shrug off. This happened in Petrified Forest National Park, in the off-trail zone the park calls Devil's Playground. It was a permitted day, early spring, and we did everything by the book. 2 of us went in, me and my friend Jess. We've done a lot of desert together. San Rafael Swell, Cedar Mesa, a couple of long slogs in the San Juan Badlands where the wind combs the bentonite into these smooth elephant-back rolls. We trust maps and compasses more than phone apps. We overpack water, and we turn around when something feels wrong. We're not reckless. The permit is what put us there. Devil's Playground is one of those areas where the park caps the human pressure by making you stop at the visitor center, sign your name, and listen to a ranger tell you the rules. Our ranger was a compact guy in his 50s with a mustache that belonged in a black and white photo. He wasn't theatrical about it. He tapped the map and said, "You'll pick this route up here, drop into the clay, head for these named hoodoos, keep your line of sight. You know what that means." We nodded. It means don't let your last point disappear before you've chosen your next one. In those bentonite bowls, everything looks like everything else. Make a breadcrumb trail with your eyes. And if it rains, you're done. Turn around. That clay will ice your boots. He looked at our gear, compass, paper map in a Ziploc, extra layers, and signed the permit. Back at your vehicle by dusk. Don't move petrified wood. Don't step on crust. It's all common sense. We said where we planned to go. The cluster the brochure calls the cathedrals, though on the topo they're just contour rings, and we wrote a turnaround time on our permit copy. We left the vehicle at the designated pullout while it was still night along I-40. Red lights of semis sliding past like a river out of phase with the land. We started at first light. The sky went from iron gray to a chalky white over the horizon, and then that thin orange seam opened up where the sun would be. You step over the fence at the boundary, and the sound from the highway drops. Not to silence, but to a background hum that feels like your own blood. Devil's Playground looks like it got poured into bowls and then the bowls were tipped. The ground is pale gray and blue bentonite, tamped hard in places and soft in others where your boot sinks a half-inch and leaves a clean stamp. The petrified logs sit like broken pillars everywhere. The color's too loud to be natural until your eyes adjust. Rust, red, cream, black bands like somebody shot varnish through stone. Every direction is hummocks and gullies, and little ridges the height of a person. If you don't keep your line of sight, you could walk in giant lazy circles all day and swear you were going straight. We were careful. We took compass bearings between the little high points. Every time we crested a ridge, we paused and picked a feature we could actually reach, not a mirage beyond 3 bowls. We checked our watches. We drank sparingly. We heard the first thing in a shallow wash maybe an hour in. Jess was ahead by 3 steps, picking our next line. The wash was no more than a wrinkle of shadow in the clay. I was making a mental note about the slant of a log that looked like a collapsed bridge when I heard her name. Not shouted, not even projected, just said in the tone of someone calling you from another room. Jess? A rise at the end, familiar in a way that choked me for a second. It was exactly how her older brother says it. He calls her Jess, in a way that tags a question on the end. Always like he's about to tell a joke. I've heard him do it 100 times around campfires and at holidays. The sound came from the wash, dead center, from a scatter of pebbles that showed no prints leading in or out. We both stopped. Jess turned, eyebrows up like, "Did you just..." I said her brother's name out loud to puncture it and headed down into the shallow for a look because that's what you do. You ground whatever you can ground. The bentonite was smooth. There were our prints, crisp and ugly, and nothing else. No rabbit hops, no coyote claws, no human. The wash twisted twice and was back out in open rolls. The wind had a trick to it that morning, clipping the edges of things and throwing sound, so we told each other that's what it was. We stood there 30 silent seconds longer than we needed to, and then kept moving. The tracks started not with a flourish, but with the kind of accident you only notice after. We were angling toward a hoodoo with a waist that looked pinched. A line of impressions crossed our path at a diagonal. Barefoot, human, straightforward, heel to toe, medium stride, toes splayed a little on the push-off. The clay took them perfectly. Off to the right of those, about 2 feet over and a little ahead, ran a set of canine prints, 4 toes round, with the nail indentations clear when the step hit a softer patch. It didn't ping the predator alarm for me. People hike barefoot sometimes. Coyotes follow you in the desert because you kick up things, or because your pattern is interesting, or because the day is slow. They tolerate us. We tolerate them. And mostly we pass like lines on graph paper, overlaying each other by coincidence. Still, the spacing was odd. The human steps and the canine steps kept within the same narrow ribbon. A tandem trackway fit to a single body, like one brain had laid both down together. We took a photo. We took another one from a different angle. We scanned a wider arc to see where they came from. They weren't old. The edges broke sharp. The weight in the heel wasn't exaggerated the way it gets when the clay dries and cracks. Whatever made them had come through that morning, not long ahead of us. It took another 5 minutes for the weird part. The human prints continued. They narrowed a little, like the person had tightened their stance or started placing their feet in their own steps to reduce their footprint. Then the shape of them shifted. The heel shortened and the forefoot rounded until it looked like 2 shallow ovals tipped just a bit inward, the way hooves would, except they weren't paired as a true ungulate would place them. The left and right alternated like a person walking, but the impressions themselves were smooth, blunt ovals, too tidy for natural hoof. You could see the edge of something hard biting the clay in the soft press where a strap or a foot flexed behind it. I crouched until my jeans pulled tight at the knees and ran a finger around the rim of one oval. The texture was wrong for a shoe. It had that hand-carved wobble, a tiny asymmetry. Jess said flatly, "Are we looking at wooden hooves?" Saying it out loud made it feel less like a joke. The canine prints next to them continued, steady as a metronome. The whole thing drifted into a wider bend, circling, always drifting to our left, like whoever was making them wanted to stay in our peripheral vision. We came up out of a little gully and saw a coyote on the opposite rim. It wasn't skulking. It stood square to us with the front pads planted, ears at the halfway position. Its coat had that peppered look coyotes get in late winter before they shed out. What was wrong was its jaw. The mouth worked slow and regular, as if chewing something that wasn't there. The tongue didn't flick to wet the nose. No breath steamed from it, though it was already warm enough for that. But there was this steady motion, a grind and release. I've seen coyotes chew a grasshopper or a mouse, the neat crunch and the swallow. This was different. We watched each other too long. The animal looked over our heads, left, right, and then back at us, and then it stepped out of sight in a casual way, like a person walking behind a partition. When we climbed to where it had stood, the clay showed the same round prints with clear nail marks, but there was a second set, lighter, as if something else had paced there and the wind had only half erased it. I don't have a better description than that. It bothered me in the way a word on the tip of your tongue bothers you. We cut our line wide to avoid a basin that looked like a trap for ankles after a rain, even though the sky was clean. On the far side, up on a ridge, a petrified log made a bridge over a small V-shaped gully. That's where we saw the raven. It was laid out on the log like someone had put it there with care, wings spread to the exact same angle on both sides, feet tucked. head turned a quarter turn so the beak pointed along the log's axis. Around the bird in a circle that would fit under a dinner plate, someone had set cholla spines, down, in the clay, all at the same height. You could say it was art. You could say it was some kid doing a ritual because his friends dared him. Jess and I stood and looked at it and experienced the same human flaw, the inability to walk past a little circle made by hands without feeling invited or warned. We didn't touch it. We took a photo. I wanted to nudge one spine out of the circle with my boot, just to break the intention of it. I didn't. As we stepped down to skirt it, I realized what else about it pressed on me. There were no approach tracks. None. And this was clay that keeps secrets only a short time. We kept moving because that's what you do. We kept to the rule. Never let your previous point drop out of sight without picking the next one. The highway sound came and went, droned and then thinned depending on the shape of the bowls. Our conversation shrank. When we did talk, it was the head-down kind. Angle left of that torch-looking hoodoo. 10 degrees more north. That low saddle with the shade line. We were discussing whether the small haze on the horizon was high cloud or lingering wood smoke from somewhere when a new voice joined the discussion. It came out of a side gully to our right. It wasn't a murmur like before. It was a replay. The timing was wrong in a way that made my skin feel thin. The words we had just spoken were thrown back at us with the same mispronunciation I had used because my mouth was dry, the same clipped laugh Jess does when she's conserving breath. Then a sound like somebody clipped their tongue fast against their teeth. A cicada burst of noise that didn't match anything a person making a joke would add. We both pivoted toward the gully, headlamps off, daylight, nothing for a long 3 count. I can't emphasize this enough. There were no prints into that gully other than coyote and what I am calling the hoof blocks, and a faint scuffle I will get to. The world was arranged like a stage, and no stage hands were visible. I was the one who decided to go down into that gully because false bravery feels like a solid thing until the ground under your boot says otherwise. My pack tugged, not like a snag on a branch. The first pull was as light as a friend catching your shoulder to get your attention. I turned with the reflex that says, we are 2 people and one of us has stopped. Jess was in front of me, not behind, her eyes already wide. The second pull was a real one. It dragged me half a step back and pivoted me to the side so that my trekking pole jabbed into the clay with that hollow tch sound. I yelled without meaning to. Jess's hand was on the back panel of my pack in an instant because that's who she is in a crisis, grabbing and leaning her weight to counter it. Nothing was there. The only thrash marks were ours. My boot gouge, her hurried half-step that smears the edges. We stripped the pack off me and checked the webbing like we were going to find fishing line tied to it. Nothing. We stood in the open for a long minute, both breathing too loud, telling ourselves the same story you tell a child who's had a nightmare because it's the only story available. The wind did it. The wind. We agreed without making a ceremony of it that the hoodoo we had planned to visit could wait. We would pick a straight line for the highway fence. The ranger had said, know where your fence is, and even if he had meant that metaphorically, I wanted metal in front of me. We put the sun on our right shoulder. I set the compass to a number that would take us where the little pencil mark on our map said we'd hit the fence within a reasonable arc. We chose the features that would carry us there in jumps. Ridge, hoodoo, shallow duck of a pass, ridge. We didn't look back because looking back wastes time and feeds whatever panic is not helpful, and because once we decided to treat the place like a straight-line exercise, introducing side stories felt like making room for those stories to grow. That lasted 20 minutes. Then Jess made a sound under her breath that was not fear exactly, but the kind of disappointment you hear when someone realizes the test they studied for has changed its questions. On a knob 20 yards left of our line, a figure stood. I don't know how to make this less dramatic, because the simple description is the worst. It was the height of a person, the width of a person. The clothes were wrong for the day, too dark, like nylon that doesn't reflect. It had a hood or a cap, something that rounded the head. The stance was the part that hit me in a clean, surgical way. The weight was on one hip, the way I stand when I am thinking and my lower back is tired. hip kicked out, one knee slightly bent in, the shoulders on a different angle than the pelvis. If you ask my friends how I stand when I'm staring at a map too long, they'd show you that angle without thinking about it. The figure tipped its head to the side in the exact degree I do, half unconsciously, when I'm trying to remember a name. Then it whistled, 3 soft notes, the ones I use to get Jess's attention if I don't want to raise my voice, not a parody, correct in pitch and in the way the breath cuts at the end of the second note when I'm not warmed up. Then came the clicking tongue sound again, fast, insectile, mechanical in its exactness, like a phone on vibrate set on hard plastic. That sound carried through the clay bowls like it had a string attached to our bones. Jess said very calmly, "Don't engage." I nodded as if she'd given a normal instruction about turning off a stove. We stepped off our line only enough to go around a small drop we could have down-climbed on a different day. The figure didn't follow in the direct sense. When we topped the next ridge, something was standing on the ridge after that, and then when we made that one, a shape was on the right where our route required us to veer left. Every time we reached a place where the ground held prints, the same alternating trackway had been there in the half hour since we first saw it, the human to oval shift, the canine. In one softer patch you could see where the oval had rocked a hair as weight transferred, leaving a crescent of deeper compression at the front edge. I don't know why that hurt my brain. Maybe because it placed a human foot inside the trick with the hooves and made the duality real. We kept the sun where we wanted it. We took sips of water. The sky played that desert game where there's no cloud but you feel shade, and then you realize it's your own adrenaline constricting and dilating your vision. I checked the compass too often and then forced myself to check it on a schedule so I wouldn't be checking it for comfort. The last basin before the fence was the kind of gently cupped landscape that can hide 100 steps. We had one more hoodoo to pass and then a broad open shale fan to cross, where the fence would be visible if you climbed even a foot higher. On the back slope of that hoodoo, and the only patch of clay that wasn't stippled by pebbles, we found the thing that took this out of the category of stories you laugh off later. Lying on its side in a shallow depression was a wooden block carved into an oval. It was the size of my hand from wrist to fingertips. A leather strap was riveted across the top and another ran at a diagonal. The strap had a buckle that would fit around a foot and cinch tight. The bottom of the block had been sanded smooth and then, I swear to you, it had been rubbed with something to seal it. Oil, animal fat, I don't know. Beside it, half mashed into the clay like someone dropped it and stepped on it, was a second block. The strap on that one had torn through at the hole from force. There was a strip of pelt, maybe rabbit or coyote, the size of a wallet, matted and stiff, with a line of stitching like someone had used it as trim or a wrap and then yanked it loose. The tracks around the blocks were messy in a way that only the end of a plan is messy. The careful alternating pattern devolved into a scuffle of heel, toe, oval, oval, claws, and one long gouge where something slid. You could see where the person had stepped out of the block and left an honest human footprint. Arch, toes, that soft pad below the big toe that doesn't show in shoes. I felt nausea that had nothing to do with heat. We didn't talk about it there. We took the photos you take when you want an argument later to have evidence. We both looked at the horizon like the highway would arrive faster if we watched for it. We made the fence in a straight line, topped the last rise, and there it was. The long wire boundary running east-west, the dull posts, the little square shadows they cast. You can hear I-40 from a mile away, and then as you get within hundreds of yards it goes mute because of the weird troughs in the earth. We kept an even pace to the fence because sprinting makes you stupid. I put my hand on the metal and felt the sun's heat in it, and the grounding effect you get when your body meets an object that has nothing to do with your fear. I waved my orange bandana and we both scanned west and east. The parked truck we flagged down was one of the maintenance rigs, white with a light bar, dust on the tires. The driver rolled the window down and took our condition in at a glance the way professionals do. Skin tone, breathing, whether our speech matched our faces. We didn't spill everything out in a jumble. We told it in order. He parked and came to the fence and looked at our map and at our bearing notes and at the little grease pencil marks we'd made on the plastic over the topo to keep us honest. Then he said, "You're going to walk me back to where you were comfortable last, and we'll work forward from there." He moved with that practiced quiet that makes you want to be quiet too. He asked the questions that put you back in your body. Water left? Any headaches? Any metal taste in your mouth? He had us point instead of talk when we could. When we got to the first alternating prints, he crouched and set a finger on the canine track gently, like it might break, and then on the human one. He didn't editorialize. He took a dozen photos on his work phone, stepping around, shooting from low, from high, with a little tape measure trapped under a rock so the numbers showed in the frame. When we reached the blocks, he said "okay" in a flat way that meant not surprised, but not exactly pleased. He took more photos, each with a case number in frame. He had a little card that he slid into the corner like a slate. He set the blocks on a plastic sheet, like a painter's drop cloth, and photographed the impressions underneath them. He didn't pick up the strip of pelt with his hands. He slid a piece of cardboard under it until it lay on the sheet, then he folded the plastic over everything and taped it. He wrote 2 numbers on the back of a business card and gave it to me. His mustache didn't move when he spoke. "This is a human," he said. "Not dramatic, just as a datum, someone trying to be something else." He held our permit copy between 2 fingers and said, "I don't want you off trail in this zone for a while. That's not an order, that's advice. You did right with your line of sight. You did right coming to the fence." He looked out at the bowls like they had personalities he knew. Sometimes the way people act out here invites them to keep acting. He didn't give us a lecture about culture or superstition or scare stories. He didn't dismiss anything. He also didn't humor us. Back at the truck, he made sure we were not medically compromised and asked us where our vehicle was. And when we said, he drove the perimeter road and met us at the pullout where highway noise makes talk feel private. He asked for our phone number so the chief ranger could follow up. He asked us to email our photos with the date and timestamps intact. He told us not to post anything until the report was filed. He gave us lukewarm water from a case and a shade line to sit in while he wrote his notes. When we left, he said the kind of thing that can sound like a platitude if you didn't just see him do the detail work. The park is the park. It doesn't control people. I think about the official explanation a lot because it is the explanation that fits the tangible evidence. A person carved hoof blocks. A person strapped them on to lay a false trail and to unsettle whoever read it. A person staged the raven in the choice spines and learned how to throw a voice in hard country where sound ricochets. A person walked with a dog, or had the dog follow. A person followed us closely enough to tug my pack and then got sloppy when they needed to move fast, tore the strap, and abandoned the props. A person stood where we could see them and copied a whistle because they had heard me do it, because that's an easy stunt. If you stop at that line, the story is a story about a person, and the way landscapes like this make some people want to wear a mask. But that line skips a thing I don't know how to file. It skips the way Jess's name was said in the exact cadence her brother uses when he wants her attention without worrying her. That upward tilt that is his and not mine and not any stranger's. It skips the echo of our own conversation playing back 5 minutes late from a gully we had just read like a book and found blank. It skips the coyote making the mouth shape of a chew with no swallow and no blink, and the way it paced with the second set of steps that faded like a rubbed pencil line. It skips the simple, unfun fact that someone had been inside of my little mannerisms enough to tilt their head the way I do, without seeing me do it that day. Unless they knew me from somewhere else, which they don't, or unless the desert teaches certain postures to all bodies, which it does sometimes, but the coincidence sits raw in the mind. When I try to talk myself out of the other word, the one I said I don't use lightly, I get quiet, because I can feel how the rational account fails to cover certain edges. There's a little ring of facts it can't close. After the incident, the chief ranger did call. He was professional and he was clear. Someone has been playing games out there off and on this year, and you were not the first to see staged things. He said they'd appreciate us reporting back if anyone contacted us or if we saw posts online that matched our photos. He said law enforcement would make a pass or two through the zone in the next week. Not because they expected to catch someone standing on a knob, but because attention sometimes shortens these phases. He didn't tell us not to come back to the park. He told us to pick on-trail routes for a while if the experience stuck in our throat. It did. We still hike. The desert is still the only place my head goes, the speed it should. But the bentonite bowls live under the top layer of my thoughts like something buried shallow. At home, in the trivial safety of a kitchen, I scrolled the photos again on a bigger screen. The blocks are plain. The straps are hardware store cheap. You can see where a person with no real craft rubbed the bottom with something that darkened the grain and made it shine. You can see the edges of the ovals dinged by small rocks. There's nothing magical in them. When I look at the image of the wash where Jess's name came out of nothing, I see only a wrinkle of shade and our prints side by side. I can reproduce the tongue-clicking sound with my mouth if I try, and I hate that I can. When I hear a coyote now in country closer to home, the yip is always a dog's and my brain puts it in the dog category and moves on. And yet, I type this and pause because the one detail that doesn't belong to the person category keeps me from sealing it off. You don't have to know a family to get an echo right. An uncle can pick up a voice in a day. A prankster with an ear can mimic a tone. But that particular call, a brother's call tucked in a lifetime, that little private rise at the end, hit like a knuckle on bone. The desert knows ways to carry and bend sound. Maybe that's all. Maybe everything I can't meet head-on bends like that under the wind. We haven't gone back off trail in Devil's Playground. It's not a vow exactly. It's just the way the map of my head sits now. We talk about going back the proper way, on marked routes where we'll meet people every hour and nod and pass. When I fill out permits now, I still listen when the ranger at the desk gives me the advice I already know, because sometimes the advice is about a fence in more than one sense. When people ask what we saw, I say a person trying to be something else because that's true, and I say the park rangers have it because that's also true. And when I'm alone and honest, I add one word in the quiet, the way I'm adding it here, not to sensationalize, not to feed a thing, but because the label matches the part of the day no other label fits. Skinwalker. I say it in a voice that doesn't invite a story back. Then I put the word away and I think again, like I was told to, about line of sight, what you keep in view and what you let drop behind you so you can move forward. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just setting the details where I can see them, the way we do with tracks, one after another, until there's a line you can follow out. If you found tracks that changed mid-stride or heard your own words played back from empty ground, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments. If this story kept your attention, a like helps others find these accounts. Stay aware out there. The Butler Wash Line. I came down off US 191 just after the heat drained out of the day, headlights taking the first slow curve toward Combe Ridge while the sky was stuck between orange and bruise-colored. If you know that country, landing down to Bluff, you know how the land folds into itself. Long sandstone waves, cottonwoods pulled tight around the washes, and then that dark spine of rock running north-south like a mile-long animal sleeping with its back out of the ground. I wasn't there for sightseeing. I owed Mike a favor, and favors are a simple math I try to keep. He helped me move out of Flagstaff when I couldn't afford a second trip, so I said yes when he asked if I could meet him near Butler Wash and help mark a fence line on an old permit he was trying to sort out. I don't say this to be dramatic. I'm not built for it, but I grew up with certain stories in the background. My uncle worked construction near Kayenta in the 90s and told me straight what not to do, where not to wander, and what words not to throw around. He didn't say those things with a grin. He said them like a man who'd made a mistake once and learned the shape of respect the hard way. So when I use the word Skinwalker here, I'm not decorating anything. I'm saying the word for what we both think it means. I'm saying it because I promised myself I'd keep the story honest. I found Mike's truck at a cattle guard off a 2-track north of Bluff. He had the bed down and a stack of T-posts and a cooler. He was chewing sunflower seeds the way he did when he was focused, counting the posts left versus daylight, like he could spend both if he was careful. We shook hands. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, more winded in the shoulders, if that makes sense. "You came," he said. "I didn't think you would." "I said I would," I told him. "What's the job?" He pointed across the flats toward the first rise of Combe Ridge. "Owner says the old line got stomped out. Wants fresh markers before a survey crew comes. I've got tags and caps. We just need to walk it, find the old holes, and make it visible. Couple hours if we don't dawdle." The air had that clean mineral taste you get after a dry wind. Grasshoppers popping in the bunch grass. Crickets starting. We took packs and the first bundle of fiber flags and stepped off the 2-track where a few cattle had torn up the edges. Following a faint memory of a fence line that had been something once, regular gaps where posts should have been, a rust stain in the dirt if you got down and looked. We walked a grid. I flagged. He set caps. The light got low and the ridge turned into a cutout of shadow. That was when I noticed the prints. I call them prints because that's what they were. They weren't shoe tracks or deer sign. If you've walked enough country, you build a file cabinet in your head. Mule deer, elk, coyote, stray dog, someone's trail runner with a Vibram pattern. This wasn't in my cabinet. It was a single line at first, like something stepping carefully, toes pointed forward. The front half was split, like a hoof, but the back ended in a heel that looked almost human. Not in the theatrical way, not like someone pressed a Halloween prop in the sand. Just wrong, like two ideas stuck together. I called Mike over without saying anything. He crouched, squinted, set his hand next to it. He didn't touch it. "Elk," he said, which was a joke, and when I didn't laugh, he didn't either. "They go anywhere?" I asked. He stood and followed the line with his eyes. The prints angled parallel to the old fence cut, then crossed it at one of the spots where a post should have stood. We walked the direction they pointed. The ground turned from sand to a crusted patch and then to grass, and I lost them, then found one again in a softer pocket near a rabbit burrow. The front half, the cloven look, was deeper than the heel. We went quiet. We didn't say it out loud, but our pace changed. We didn't linger at the post spots anymore. We moved. "You get much traffic out here?" I asked, to make a sound. "Once a month a ranch hand comes through. Tourists stick to the highway and Butler wash pullouts. The owner doesn't like people wandering on these spurs. Why call you now?" He nodded at the ridge. "Owner's kid had a scare camping near a stock tank last week. Said coyotes kept circling. They sounded like people arguing. Don't look at me like that." That's what he told the owner. They got spooked and left a mess, and now I'm the one who gets asked to clean it up and make the line obvious again. We worked until the last of the light burned flat. He said there was a windmill tank a quarter-mile to the east where we could crash. He had water and a camp stove and said it wasn't worth parking the truck closer just to spook whatever grazed out here at night. I agreed because the sky was already showing stars, and I didn't want to walk back to the truck and drive a fresh set of tracks down into a place that didn't want them. The windmill was the old kind, with the tail fin riddled by 2 decades of holes. The head creaked once for every stray puff of wind. The tank was a dark plate, and the frogs were loud. We set our pads on the upwind side of the windbreak, built a small burner flame for coffee, and didn't talk much. I kept thinking about the prints. I kept thinking about the way they crossed that fence line like they understood lines and didn't care. First sign at camp wasn't much. Something moved the grass on the far side of the tank and made no sound. No cricket stopped. No rabbit exploded out. Just grass bent in a smooth path, like a hand pressed it. Then the windmill tail clicked and swung and made the same sound twice in a row, like something had knocked it. I told myself it was the wind. I tell myself simple stories until I can't anymore. We finished coffee and turned off the stove. No fire. I never do a fire when I'm sleeping light. Fires tell things where you are and how awake you are. We lay back in our bags with our boots on and our headlamps around our necks because I have learned not to waste time reaching. When I closed my eyes, the creak of the mill and the frog noise merged into a single sheet. I drifted fast and then woke hard without a dream in between. It was full dark. The stars were as bright as they get in that part of Utah, and I could make out the silhouette of the ridge behind the blacker line of cottonwoods along the wash. What woke me was my name. I'll write that plain. It was my name, said clean and wrong from the far side of the tank. Not a shout, not a whisper. It was my name in the voice of someone who had learned it by hearing it and wanted to try it on. If you've ever heard your own name from a stranger's mouth, someone who says it like a question when they're not sure they found the right person, that's what it was. It came once, then there was a pause, and then the frogs got too loud again, like the sound had scared them late. I kept still. I felt Mike's elbow nudge the edge of my pad. He was awake. He didn't sit up either. We waited. The name didn't come again. Instead, the windmill turned one slow notch and the tail flicked like something brushed it. I rolled my head and looked at Mike. He was already looking at me. His eyes were the only part that moved. He mouthed, "You heard it," and I nodded. I eased my hand into my pack the way you do when you learn to move slow and keep your fingers working before your shoulders. I found the headlamp, then the small flashlight I trust, then the folding knife I keep. Not because I believe it will solve anything, but because the act of having it matters. We didn't turn the lights on. We gave it time. I counted 30 breaths. There was nothing but frogs in the mill, and the frogs were too loud in the way noise gets loud to hide something else. I don't know what rule I broke by clearing my throat, but the moment I did, the frogs cut off like a switch. The silence had shape. A footstep in grass. Real. Measured. Another. The sound walked along the rim of the tank and stopped opposite us. I could see the water shiver. That's how close it was. I said, "We're not lost," because that was the sentence that came to me. I've used it before when coyotes circle close, and when a stray dog thinks it can test a campsite. It tells a thing you are oriented. It tells a person you're not a mark. The stillness after was a held breath that didn't return to the chest it left from. Then it made a new mistake. It tried my name a second time, a little nearer, and got the vowel wrong. The wrongness is what scared me more than the boldness, like it was practicing, like it wanted to be better at it for later. Mike said, steady as I've ever heard him, "You should go." The water rippled toward us like something had leaned down to drink, then stopped without the sound of a tongue or a muzzle. The heel of my right hand started to sweat where it pressed on the ground. I know how coyotes move. I know their curiosity and their bluff. This wasn't a coyote. I'm not going to guess at shapes in the dark, but when a thing holds its breath with you and tries your name on twice, you don't have to see it to know you're past the normal edges of the map. We didn't turn our lights on. We lay there with our boots on and waited it out. The frogs began again in pieces. A breeze pushed the vanes and the mill creaked once, twice. You can believe what you like about what moved along the tank's far lip and then away into the grass. I heard steps go light, like it didn't want the grass to talk for it. I heard them stop at the cottonwoods and then nothing. When the sky finally thinned, I sat up and my back hurt like I'd been bracing for an hour. Mike sat up at the same time. Neither of us said good morning. We walked the far side of the tank and looked for prints. We wanted to find them and didn't. Grass doesn't keep a diary. The only mark was a single place where something set weight near the tank's rim and dragged 2 fingernails across algae and iron. I say fingernails because that's what it looked like. 2 narrow tracks side by side, shallow, a few inches long, and too clean for a hoof or a paw. We should have left then, should have packed up and driven until the woods were nothing but a smear in our rearview mirror, but fear has a strange way of shackling you. It tells you to stay still, to not draw attention, to wait until you're sure the danger is past. So we stayed. The 3rd day crawled by. The sun was weak, barely warming the frost-bitten ground. I kept busy, anything to distract myself. Boiled water, checked gear, scribbled in my notebook. But always, I felt it, that stare, like invisible fingers trailing down my spine. Once I swore I saw movement, a pale shape between the trees, gone when I blinked. Another time I heard my name whispered low and breathy, my own voice. By evening, dread pressed so heavy on me it was hard to breathe. Still, I built the fire higher, ringed it with stones, as though flame alone could ward off what stalked me. I sat with my hatchet in my lap, eyes glued to the dark. It came again when the moon was high. This time it wasn't pretending to be my brother. "Help me!" The voice was cracked, hoarse, as though forced through broken lungs. It came from just beyond the glow of the fire. "Please, I'm hurt." Something shuffled closer. Leaves crunched, branches snapped. I stood, hatchet raised, light swinging wildly. A figure stepped into the fringe of the firelight. For one wild, desperate second, I thought it really was a man, a hiker, lost, injured. His arms hung at his sides, his posture hunched. But then he moved closer and I saw his skin was too tight, stretched wrong over long limbs. His face was pale, expression slack, eyes wide and glassy like a doll's. His mouth hung open, jaw unhinged too far. "Help me," he croaked again, but the words didn't match the movement of his lips. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "Stay away." It tilted its head, bird-like. Then it smiled. The smile was too wide, too full of teeth. It stepped forward. I swung the hatchet. Not to hit it, just to keep it back. The blade whistled through the air. The thing jerked to a stop. It cocked its head again, watching me, studying me. Then, in one swift, unnatural lunge, it retreated back into the trees, swallowed by shadow. The forest was silent again. I collapsed beside the fire, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. The next morning I found something waiting at the edge of camp. A rabbit, dead, its body flayed open, skin peeled neatly back, organs missing. Its glassy eyes stared at me and its mouth had been pulled into a grotesque smile, lips sliced to the cheek. It was a gift, or a warning. Either way, it was meant for me. By then, my resolve had cracked. I stuffed my gear back into my pack, doused the fire, and bolted. The forest seemed different in daylight, brighter, safer. I almost believed I'd make it, but the tracks followed me. Everywhere I went, I saw them. Bare human feet pressed into mud, into leaves, always alongside my trail, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead, like it was circling, herding me. By afternoon, I was lost. The map might as well have been blank. Every direction looked the same. Towering pines, endless undergrowth, shadows crawling long as the sun dipped low. That's when I heard it again, my name, at first faint, then louder. "Hey," the voice called. "Over here." It sounded exactly like me. I broke into a run. Branches whipped my face. Thorns tore at my clothes. The voice echoed between the trees, mocking, repeating my words from nights before. "Not real. Stay away. Not real." Each phrase was my voice thrown back at me, twisted and cruel. Finally, I burst into a small clearing and stopped dead, because there, across the space, stood me. It was like looking into a broken mirror. Same clothes, same face, but the details were wrong. The shoulders were hunched too far forward, arms hanging slack, like they didn't belong to it. The grin split its face ear to ear, teeth too sharp, too many. It didn't move, just watched. I raised the hatchet, hands trembling. "What do you want?" It tilted its head. Then it spoke. "Hey, you awake?" The exact words it had used the first night. In my voice. Something inside me snapped. I screamed and charged. The thing didn't flinch, but before I reached it, the shadows closed in. It dissolved into the tree line faster than anything human. Gone. I was alone in the clearing, chest heaving, the echo of my own scream hanging in the air. I didn't stop running after that. Didn't care where I went, just ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. When I finally collapsed, night was already falling. The cold seeped in fast. I was too exhausted to make a fire, too scared to sleep. I sat in the dark, clutching my hatchet, listening to the forest breathe. Somewhere out there it was waiting, and I knew it wouldn't stop until I broke. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark. Every second stretched like an hour. Every sound felt sharp enough to cut. My eyes burned from trying to pierce the shadows, but all I could see were endless trees. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It waited. Something was out there, just past the black wall of pines. Listening, watching. I clutched the hatchet so hard my knuckles cracked. My breath came shallow, ragged, each inhale too loud in my own ears. I told myself if I survive until dawn, I'll find my way out. I'll leave everything. Just run. But the night wasn't done with me. It started with the snapping of a branch. Close, too close. My head jerked up, muscles coiled. The sound had come from maybe 10 feet away. Then another snap, circling behind me. I turned, flashlight beam sweeping across bark and shadows. Nothing. The beam caught on something pale. A flash of white between two trunks. My chest seized. It was gone when I blinked. Then a whisper, not from one place, from everywhere. Here, come here, over here. All in different voices. My brothers, my own, strangers, men, women. They overlapped, blended, growing faster, louder, until the trees themselves seemed to speak. "Hey, man," one voice barked in my ear. My own voice. Too close. I spun and swung the hatchet. It met nothing but air. My scream echoed through the forest. The whispers cut off, and the silence that followed was worse. That was when I realized something chilling. It wasn't just toying with me anymore. It was hurting me. Every sound came from the edge of the dark, pushing me one way. Every glimpse of movement drove me forward. Step by step, I was being guided. Panic surged hot in my chest. I bolted in the opposite direction, crashing through brush, the hatchet still in my hand. The forest wasn't natural anymore. Branches seemed to grab at me. Roots caught my boots. Brambles raked my skin. Behind me came the sound of pursuit. Not running, gliding, smooth, effortless. I didn't look back. I don't know how long I ran before I stumbled into another clearing. I collapsed to my knees, chest heaving, vision swimming. At first I thought I'd found salvation. There was a structure, a cabin. It sat crooked in the clearing, its roof sagging, windows dark, old, abandoned. But to me it was hope. 4 walls, a door, a barrier between me and the thing in the trees. I scrambled to my feet and rushed inside. The air reeked of mildew and rot. Floorboards sagged under my weight, but it was shelter. I slammed the door shut, slid the rusted bolt, and pressed my back to it. Silence. My ears rang with it, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stayed there, clutching the hatchet, staring into the gloom. Dust floated in the flashlight beam, cobwebs draped from beams. Furniture lay broken, gnawed by time, but for the first time in days I felt safe, until I saw the walls. Scratches everywhere, deep gouges carved into the wood, long and violent, as though made by claws. They covered every surface, jagged lines crisscrossing, and words scrolled in frantic, uneven handwriting. Don't look at it. Don't listen. Not a voice. Run! My stomach turned. This wasn't safety. This was a grave. The first thud against the wall nearly stopped my heart. Something hit the cabin from outside. Hard. The boards rattled, dust raining down. Another thud on the other side. Then the roof creaked as though weight pressed down. I held my breath, eyes wide. The whispers came again, louder now, right outside the thin walls. Please help me. So cold. Knocking, slow, deliberate, from the window frame, from the door, from behind me. I pressed my back to the wall, hatchet raised, my entire body trembling. Then silence. A pause that stretched so long it almost felt safe. And then, from directly behind the wall at my ear, "Let me in," in my brother's voice. I screamed and stumbled away from the wall. The cabin shuddered. Boards groaned. Something heavy scraped across the roof. I backed into the corner, my flashlight beam darting wildly. The whispers rose into a cacophony. Every voice I'd heard in the woods, overlapping, filling the cabin until it was deafening. My own voice screamed back at me. Phrases I'd muttered in fear. Not real. Stay away. Not real. I clamped my hands over my ears. My vision blurred. My skull felt like it was splitting. And then, silence again. The door creaked. Slowly, painfully slow. The bolt slid back as though unseen hands pushed it. I stumbled forward, hatchet raised, screaming no. The door stopped, hung half open. Nothing stood there, just the forest, dark and endless. But I knew it was waiting, watching. I didn't last much longer in the cabin. The weight of those scratches on the walls, the words of whoever had come before me, they pressed too heavy. I ran again, into the forest, into the dark. I don't know where I went, didn't matter. Every direction was the same, trees and shadows. But the whispers followed, the laughter, and sometimes worse. I'd catch glimpses in the beam of my light, limbs bending backward, eyes glowing pale, mouths too wide, never fully seen. Just enough to remind me it was close, always close. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me down. I collapsed at the base of a pine, lungs burning, body shaking. That was when I heard it. Not a whisper, not a mimic. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, coming straight toward me. I aimed the flashlight, hands trembling, and for the first time I saw it. It stood between the trees, half in shadow, tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and crooked, joints bending wrong. Its skin was pale, stretched too thin, veins black beneath. Its face, God, its face shifted like wet clay. One moment my brother's, then mine, then a stranger's, always smiling, always wrong. Its eyes glowed faint and animal-like, reflecting the beam. It didn't move, just watched me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then slowly it lifted its hand. Long, crooked fingers pointed at me, and in my own voice it said, "You can't leave." I should have run the moment I saw it. Instead I froze. The thing stood there between the pines, taller than any man, its body warped and wrong, limbs too long, joints bending like a spider's. Its face rippled, flickering between mine, my brother's, strangers I didn't know, always smiling, always wrong. "You can't leave," it said again. My own voice, too clear, too hollow. The hatchet shook in my hand. My flashlight beam wavered, catching its pale skin, its stretched jaw. It took one step closer. The ground seemed to groan beneath it. I stumbled backwards, slamming into the trunk of a pine. My throat was dry, my breath shallow. Every instinct screamed that running was useless, but staying meant death. So I did the only thing I could. I fought. With a ragged scream, I swung the hatchet. The blade caught empty air as the creature darted back, unnaturally fast, almost liquid in its retreat. And then it laughed. My laugh. Shaky, desperate, hollow. The sound echoed from every tree, bouncing around me until I couldn't tell where it stood. I spun wildly, slashing at shadows, my lungs heaving. "Stop it!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The forest answered in perfect unison, dozens of voices, all mine, all mocking. "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, the hatchet slipping from numb fingers. The laughter cut off, and the silence swallowed me. When I opened my eyes again, the thing was gone, or so I thought. I staggered to my feet, clutching the hatchet, and ran. Branches toward my skin, roots tangled my boots, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Somewhere in the distance I swore I saw light, a faint glow, pale and steady. Salvation. I barreled toward it, lungs screaming, legs on fire. The light grew stronger, warm, golden, like the beam of a lantern. My heart leapt. Maybe a ranger, a hiker, a way out. I burst into a clearing and froze. The lantern sat in the dirt, alone, burning steady. No one held it. The clearing was empty, silent. And when I turned back, the trees had closed behind me. Trapped. "Hey," a voice said. I spun. The lantern's light flickered, casting long shadows, and from those shadows it stepped forward. The Skinwalker, but this time it didn't wear my face. It wore hers, my mother's, her eyes, her smile, her voice, soft and broken. "It's okay, honey. You're safe now." My chest collapsed. My grip faltered. The hatchet nearly slipped. "No," I whispered. She stepped closer, arms outstretched, her face flickering in and out of shape. "Yes," she said. "You're so tired. Just come with me. Rest." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I saw it then, just for a second in the flicker of the lantern. Her eyes, black, shining, animal. Not her, never her. I screamed and swung the hatchet with everything left in me. The blade sank deep into flesh. The thing shrieked, not my mother's voice, not mine, but something raw and inhuman. The sound rattled the trees, shook the air, split my skull. I yanked the hatchet free and swung again, and again, screaming with every strike. Its body convulsed, limbs bending, face twisting between 1,000 identities. Blood, if that's what it was, poured black and thick. Finally it staggered back, shrieking, and dissolved into the shadows. Gone. The lantern winked out, and I was alone. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling onto the dirt road where I'd parked my trucks days before. My clothes were shredded, my skin torn, my mind a blur. The truck was still there, somehow. I drove until the sun rose, until the forest was nothing but a distant smear in the rear-view mirror. That was months ago. I haven't gone back. I never will. But some nights when the world is quiet, I hear it. My brother's voice, my own voice. "Hey, you awake?" And I know it's still out there, waiting. If you've encountered something near Butler Wash that knew things it shouldn't, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. And if this kept you listening tonight, a like helps others find these accounts. Stay safe out there. The Camp Dry Mesa incident. I took a summer job at a camp so I wouldn't have to go home. That's the plain truth. I'm 20. My friend Trevor told me Camp Dry Mesa was easy money. Kids, hikes, pawn duty, a few campfires. The place sits off NM 117 near Grants, New Mexico, where the black rock fields of El Malpais run to the horizon and cold air leaks out of holes in the ground like a basement you can't seal. I figured I'd watch kids during the day and sleep hard at night. I didn't go there looking for anything strange. What happened felt practical in the moment and ugly afterward, and I'm writing it down because I keep seeing advice online that turns simple problems into ghost stories. This wasn't a ghost. It was something that uses our habits against us, and we handled it like you handle a mean animal near a ranch. Trevor and I rolled in 2 days before the campers. We passed the El Malpais ranger station, took a Quiche spur road to a cattle gate, and met the director, Mara. She had that counselor energy that keeps things moving without raising her voice. She walked us past Basalt Ridge, 3 long bunkhouses on cinder blocks, then the South Tank Pond, the archery berm, and the trail to 2 legal viewpoints the camp used. Sandstone bluffs overlook, and the lava falls flow. She was precise about boundaries. The Park Service marked what was allowed and what wasn't. Anything below grade without signage was off limits. No arguments. That suited me fine. My cabin assignment was silver badgers, ages 12 to 13. Another first year named Noah got orange coyotes, 10 to 11. Our porches faced the same footpath. That first night, after the pizza and plastic egg orientation, I lay down on a thin mattress and listened to wood settle. The night had that dry, high desert feel. Big empty sky, low shrubs, dust, Around 1 in the morning, a smell moved through the cabin vents. Not strong at first, wet creosote, like the air after a sprinkle. Then a copper tang under it, and something like old cooking fat. I got up, taped a blanket over the window because the overhead security bulb was bouncing glare off the glass and it made me feel like there was a face there, and I went back to bed. I sleep fine in new places. I didn't that night. The second day we did staff training. A senior counselor named Crispin and his partner Laya gave the standard legend talk they do for kids about an outlaw who hid in the tubes and punished rule breakers. It's theater to keep children from sneaking into lava holes. Everyone laughed. Later, a small group of us hiked Sandstone Bluff's overlook so we could learn the route to lead. On the way back, Noah pointed at a run of tracks in grit that stopped me cold. You could see goat prints, well-defined. In the same path they switched to bare feet. The toes pointed the wrong way. The stride didn't change. I wanted a normal explanation, so I said, "Prank." Noah shrugged. We walked on. A quarter-mile from there, tucked under a flat stone, we found a cloven hoof that looked cut clean and then placed. No blood, just the copper smell again. We didn't bring it back. We didn't tell anyone because new staff already asked enough dumb questions. That night, something tapped under the bunks. Not scratching, not a shuffle, just a steady pop from the crawl space. I checked the vent the next morning and found a string of small goat knuckles tied like beads, looped through with a strip of our camp t-shirt. I took it to Mara. She didn't do the smile and distract thing people do with spooky objects. She walked me to the maintenance shed, opened a 5-gallon bucket of salt, dropped the bead string inside, and told me to get breakfast. There was a box of orange cattle tags on the shelf and 3 dead trail cameras without their cards. She didn't explain any of that. She didn't need to. I understood that she'd handled things like this before, and the plan was to keep kids away from holes in the ground and not give whatever it was easy reasons to climb the porch steps. After lunch, Noah and I did a dry run to the rim above Big Skylight. We stayed on the legal side of the monument signs and looked down into a wide shaft that breathed cold air like a fan on low. On the rim, somebody had stacked flat basalt discs into a ring. It looked like the things teenagers build when they smoke and want to leave a mark. Thoughtless art. The center was clean, dustless, like a body lay there often enough to make a print, and then was removed. We didn't touch the ring. We agreed that when our kids arrived, they weren't going anywhere near below-grade anything, and we'd meet in the mornings to compare notes. The smell had started to show up just before midnight and just before dawn, and it carried through the cabins like a reminder. The monsoon built on day 3. Those quick cells stack over the zunias and roll off the ridge. Trails change from powder to slick in minutes. Electronics got banned after a kid on staff nearly lost his phone between 2 slabs at Lava Falls during training, which meant no easy proof hunting. We did paper head counts and shouted checks. That limits the kind of story I can tell, and I actually think it made us safer. People do dumb things with cameras when they're scared. Food bins by the pond began turning up, opened, with lids set aside. Raccoons make a mess. This looked careful. At the archery berm, I found my own frayed shoelace tied in a bow around a prickly pear pad. Goat hair threaded through it. I cut that lace jagged the day before. The air went coppery again. Nothing you'd notice in a city, but obvious here where the only other smell is dust and resin. Trevor was part of a group sneaking near a shallow depression that pooled cold air after sundown. I told him to knock it off. He said he was moving contraband so he wouldn't get busted with it in a cabin. Everyone rolls the dice a little before campers show up. He went anyway. Hours later, he fell asleep, sitting up on our porch bench. His boots were on the wrong feet. The skin across his knuckles was scraped like he'd spent time moving on hands and feet. He said he fell on the cinder path. I believed the parts I could verify and kept the rest to myself. At dawn, Noah and I walked the Big Skylight rim. The basalt discs had been restacked wider. In the center lay a silver tarp bundle about the size of a hog-tied person. 2 fresh pinion poles were lashed underneath it like a stretcher. We didn't open the tarp. We picked it up together, carried it 100 yards to the service road, set it down, and covered it with a spare blanket. Then we found Mara. We wanted an adult present for the unwrapping, for a lot of reasons: legal, medical, moral. She brought 2 senior staff. We cut the tarp. Inside lay a goat carcass, legs folded tight, trussed with new paracord. The head was gone. The throat had been cut clean. No insects. Around the meat, somebody had tied strips of counselor shirts in those same neat bows. I recognized a strip of Trevor's tie-dye. The smell hit hard, copper and old fat. Mara didn't talk about coyotes or kids playing jokes. She took a field notebook from her pocket, wrote down the date, the spot, and our names. She called it a warning placement. Then she told us how we were going to stop giving it chances. The plan wasn't magic. It was ranch logic. We'd salt the ground around the mouths that breathed onto our side of the property line, mark perimeters with stakes and tape so no one crossed at night by accident, and bait a far mouth past junction with butcher offal bought-in grants to pull it away from cabins. We'd keep the campers busy topside and leave below areas to the Park Service. If we could get through the next 2 weeks of storms, it would settle. I asked if she wanted me to avoid a word. She said, "Don't say it where rock can carry it." I said it anyway because I needed to feel like a grown man for 5 seconds. Skinwalker. She didn't blink. We moved a 40-pound bag of salt in a painter's bucket. We laid a tight ring at the rim where cold air came up. It felt stupid, and then it felt like building a fence. Near junction, we set a second ring. While we did that, something stepped out across the lava field. It didn't rush. It was wrong. Thin, long arms, bare legs, caked gray with dust, hair matted like it had been burned and came back patchy. It didn't talk, and I'm grateful for that. It angled downwind as if it had done that same arc 1,000 times. When the copper smell thickened, I felt my stomach pull the way it does when you walk into a butcher shop. We didn't run. We kept our shoulders square, backed out slow, and returned to the lights. At midnight, the steps went past the cabins. You could feel the boards catch the weight on the porch posts. It didn't try the stairs. It walked and stopped and walked again, the way a person does when checking windows for movement. We stood with mag lights pointing at our own feet to keep from blinding the kids inside, and we didn't wave them around or shout challenges. Light made it bank its path, that's all. 15 minutes later, the smell thinned. I looked over at Noah. He nodded. We checked the far line with binoculars from the fence. The bait was gone. Hands, not hooves, had scuffed the salt. A heavy drag mark went away from camp. We'd pulled it where we wanted. At dawn, Laya hadn't slept in her bunk. Crispin said she was with him earlier. That told me nothing. Trevor stayed off to the side like a dog that knows he's in trouble but hasn't worked out why it matters. Mara said we were closing the loop now, before heat and lightning drove everybody inside. We did not enter a named tube. That would have gotten us sighted by the ranger, and it also would have put us at risk in a way we couldn't control. On the ranch lease, there was a shallow blowhole, an opening in the basalt the size of a truck hood that reached a side room near junction. Bright daylight hit the floor and the drop was maybe 15 feet. The plan, 2 down, 2 up. Noah and I would descend on a short rope with helmets to take a quick look for a person in distress or signs of where they went. Trevor and Crispin would belay and hold positions at the rim. Mara would stay with the radio at the road. Rules were simple. We stayed within the daylight. We didn't step across any salt, and if the smell spiked, we were out. Inside was cold and quiet, the way a basement is quiet. The air moved past my ears, steady, not pulsing. On the floor, against the wall, lay a pinion pole with a clean notch, a length of paracord in that same bow knot, and a strip of Laya's bandana. Someone had dragged something on a lattice. You could see the rails had scraped basalt dust and left 2 clean lines that pointed to a crawl no bigger than a kitchen window. We didn't stick our heads in. We didn't even bend at the waist. We hooked the lattice with a loop of rope, kept our boots inside the salt arc we'd poured, and pulled hard. Something on the other side grabbed the far end and tried to hold it. It let go when the lattice raked salt. On the third yank, it slid over the line and crashed into daylight. Laya lay on it, bound at wrists and ankles, gagged with a torn t-shirt strip. Her forearms were gritted like somebody had dragged her across sandpaper. Her eyes kept going to the crawl. We didn't look where she looked. We cut her loose and kept her on our side of the line. We had to make it stop using that route. You can lock windows, but you really sleep only when you change the door. Noah scrambled up the rope and set a come-along with a strap around a block on the rim. I held the belay and refilled the salt. Trevor and Crispin levered a basalt slab that looked like a good fit for the crawl mouth. The smell came up again, heavy and close, a shade pressed just to the edge of light. It stopped at the bright powder like a dog at a hot stove. On a 3 count, they flipped the slab. It slid, dropped, and wedged flush across the opening. Dust came up in a sheet. The air pushed hard past us and then slowed. The copper hung and then eased. No footsteps. No testing the new seal. Just the ordinary sound of air moving past rock. We hauled Laya up slow. She could stand with help. We set cattle panels over the blowhole, wired to rebar. Mara called the county deputies and a Park Service law enforcement ranger. We waited by the road in full sun with salt rings at our feet like flotation devices. Nobody cracked jokes. When the patrol trucks rolled in, we showed them what we had on the surface. The salted rim lines on our side of the property line, the drag marks, the tarp bundle we hadn't moved since the morning, the blocked blowhole. We didn't play expert. The ranger took photographs of footprints, noted the paracord, the cattle panels, the goat parts, and wrote down human interference with wildlife and illegal dumping. It wasn't the whole story. It was enough to shut our program down and bring in a formal sweep without turning it into a circus for kids with YouTube channels. Camp Dry Mesa closed that afternoon. Parents were called. Buses came early. Nobody went missing. Laya kept watered down that night, and most of her memory came back as fragments that matched the scratches on her arms and nothing else. Trevor quit and left the state a week later. He mailed me the braided hair charm he'd bought at a gas station on the way in with a note. Yours worked. Mine didn't. I drove back to that same station and gave the kid behind the counter the braid and cash for his trouble. He didn't ask questions and I didn't offer any. The Park Service put up more fencing around big skylights so you can still look down from the legal side but not stand right on the rim. The ranch amended its lease agreement to ban all-night programs within a set distance of any blowholes on their side. If you hike Sandstone Bluffs Overlook today, you won't see anything special. That's how it should be. On my last night before I left New Mexico, I stood there with Noah as a small storm pushed across the flats. The air smelled like wet rock and resin. No copper, no fat. We stacked 3 flat stones by the interpretive sign and walked back to the truck. If you camp near El Malpais, stay on signed trails. Respect the boundaries. Don't follow prints toward cold air after dark. If you smell creosote and copper riding in together around midnight, stand on your porch with a light at your feet and count to morning. If someone you trust says to salt the mouths, do it without making it dramatic. I use the word you're not supposed to use because I'm not standing on that rock as I write, and because I know someone will ask. People like names. The name doesn't change the work. We didn't beat anything out there. We made choices that kept kids alive. We blocked a door and left the rest to the people who managed that land for a living. That's a good ending. It's the only kind I can live with. If you've worked at a camp or remote site where something tested boundaries at night, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments. If this story kept your attention,